So, Skye, earlier in this conversation, you mentioned that a recent Supreme Court decision, the one that overturned Roe v. Wade, has been a motivating factor in a lot of voters' participation in early voting so far. So, speaking of the highest court in the land, I'm curious, how could the 2024 election affect the future of the Supreme Court?
This is a significant election for the future of the Supreme Court. It is quite possible that whoever is elected will have the ability to nominate and confirm judges, but it's more significant actually because of what we know about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court right now, the American people have a very low favorability rating. They do not view the court widely as legitimate as a result of a number of ethical lapses and as a result of the fact that the court has overturned people's rights as opposed to protecting it. And so the next president will also have the opportunity to reform the Supreme Court and put in place or propose reforms and put in place important reforms for people and communities. You've already seen President Biden call for that. Vice President Harris called for that throughout her campaign. And so this is a very significant election for the future of the courts, not just with respect to who will be nominated and confirmed. And that's very important. We know that. We know that Roe v. Wade was overturned because of the nominations and confirmations that Donald Trump made in the last election, which is what is so motivating people. But it's very important kind of who is on the court, but also what we are going to do in this country to restore legitimacy to the institution of the Supreme Court when so many Americans have lost confidence in that institution. It is not good for democracy, and it is not good for people and communities for the American people to not have confidence in their courts. And so I think the next president, and particularly if it's Vice President Harris, will have a real opportunity to make some of those changes that are incredibly important. The other thing I would point out for the courts is it's not just the Supreme Court. Remember that our court system in the United States has federal courts across the country that the president is able to nominate and the Senate confirms. President Biden has confirmed a number of judges that are professionally and demographically diverse, that reflect the American people and that have done the work of the American people. And it's important because those judges, you and I have talked about this on various other interviews about mifepristone or a lot of these issues that arise. They arise with lower court judges. And so that's an important thing to watch as well. And this next president will have a major role with those confirmations.
It's really a multi-pronged approach. If President Biden appointed some 200 judges on lower courts, the next president, could they appoint just as many? Do you think? Is that realistic?
So it's a function of how many vacancies there are. And both President Trump and President Biden appointed and confirmed quite a number of judges. But there are many things that we need to be thinking about in our country. Our lower courts are overworked. And there have been calls for expansions of the number of judges in the lower court system so that the American people can have their cases heard in a more efficient way. And so that is one area that the Senate and that we hope a future president will look at with respect to the courts. And then, of course, there are the nominations. There will be retirements and there are a number of vacancies. There'll be important vacancies to be filled, even with Congress's last few weeks of its term this year, that a number of organizations will be focused. Democracy Forward, Demand Justice, and so many others will be focused on encouraging those confirmations.